So we are continuing the discussion and the learning of chapter 4 in Shaar Hayichud ve'emunah. We finished off last week discussing the beginning of this chapter. We'll go back and do a little bit of what we started last time, and we'll go from there. This is a very important chapter discussing and understanding the possibility. We finished off chapter 3 with a question. The question was, if in fact we are the expression of godliness, like a metaphor of the rays of the sun, how they're found in the sun, which means within the sun, they don't exist at all. How is it that we have such an existence? We recognize, we sense our existence, etc. And the answer we started saying was based on a verse, Ki shemesh u'magen havaya elikim. Like the sun and its sheath, its shield, the cover is Havaya and Elikim. As we mentioned, Hashem has various names, 7 names that it says, if you wrote them, you're not permitted to erase these names. And the first name that we know is Havaya, Yud, Hey, and then Vav and Hey. We say Havaya to understand it. And the next name is Elokim. These 2 names represent 2 strong, different concepts in understanding what God's relationship and God's expression. Havaya represents what's called Hashpa'ah, giving, expressing, sharing, whereas Elikim represents contracting, restriction, holding back. There's much more. That's a very oversimplification, but that's the general idea of Havaya versus Elikim. In this chapter, we went and explained that that's the beginning to understand why is it that the world seems to, and not just seems to, really is an existence. It's because, and meaning it sends itself as an existence outside of God's direct influence. You don't sense every second that God's pushing me into existence. And the reason is because of Elikim, as we'll explain. We went on to explain that the name, we spoke about this, I'll say it now. There's a letter, I believe, from the Rebbe's father that explains that which we said in this chapter. We said the concept that Hashem's name, Yud, K, Vav, K, is like the word, it is the word Hoive with a Yud in the front. Hoive means Hashem makes into existence, and the Yud in the front means constantly. Like we find by Iyuv, it says Kain Yasa Iyuv would constantly do. The Yud means constantly. But the Rebbe's father explains in the letter a very fascinating idea. And this was discussed in other classes, our Shabbos afternoon class, and other places. The name Yud K Vav K, Hashem's name Havaya, each of those letters represent some of God's spheres. As we know, the way Hashem created us, when Hashem created us in the image of man, in God's image, one of the understandings is that Hashem created us, our Shamais, with the same spheres that Hashem expresses himself in. In other words, our essence is made up of 10 powers of the soul. And that was Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gevura, Teferes, Netzach, Yisod, Malchus, as is Hashem's expression in the spheres. So we have the reflection or mini of God's existence and expression within our own soul, with our identity. But in the spheres, you have the 10 attributes of Chachma, Bin, Das, etc. That being said, in the name Havaya, the Yud represents Chachma. And the idea is Chachma is conception, the first nucleus, that first dot, that's a Yud. The Hey represents Bina. Bina is expansion. That's the job of Bina, to take idea, and it's called comprehension. Not just a nucleus, let's understand it, let's expand it. The Vav represents the 6 middays, 6 of the 7, and that is that's the 6 middays coming down, like in the process coming down to this world, being drawn down, and that's the Vav is 6. And then you have the Hey, which is once again Malchus, again expansion. As it comes down, you have the expansion again, that's called Malchus. That's how it's explained. Yud is Chachma, the first Hey is Bina, the Vav is the 6 middays, and the Hey is Malchus. It's also explained that these 4 letters represent the 4 worlds. And these worlds are Atzilus, Beria, Yetzira, and Asiya. That the Yud is Atzilus, the Hey is Beria, the Vav is Yetzira, and the Hey at the end is Asiya. And it's not 2 different things, it's one thing. Because as we know, in the world of Atzilus, what's the most dominant of the spheres? They're all there. The most dominant one is Chachma. In the world of Beria, the most dominant is the Bina, etc., etc. So knowing that, the Rebbe Father explains a fascinating idea. That comes out that the Yud of Hashem's name really corresponds to Atzilus / Chachma. Why is that important or fascinating? Because we know that Chachma is the words Koyach Ma. In other words, my power is what? When we have what in Torah, it's the expression of bittul. We know Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron says, "V'nachnu ma." What are we? We're nothing. Ma means we're nothing. In other words, Chachma represents that first level of expression of intellect, where there is no expression. It's just a nucleus. In other words, it's the ultimate in bittul. So it says, what powers the next three worlds? Atzilus is the world of bittul, and that world that says Hashem and all the middays are all one. There is no existence of Atzilus for itself. Atzilus and godliness is all one. Only in Beria, the first of the next three worlds, do we call it Beria, which means creation. That's when the world starts to exist, so to speak, even though we're talking about the spiritual realms, very high level of existence. It starts to exist as independent identity that begins in Beria. So when we say in the Yud and the word Hoive, it's the bittul that gives that constant creation, meaning it's the level of bittul that the world has to God that allows that constant creation of Hoive every single day. That's how he explains this interesting idea. But we shouldn't get distracted by that point. Why not? Because really, we're explaining how in Havaya is idea of Chachma, Bina, etc. But when you have Havaya and Elikim, there are two different ideas, not Chachma and Bina, but Chesed and Gevura. And this is the key that we want to focus on today. And you want to really focus on the second part, as we'll get to. Hashem's name Havaya, Hashem's name of Yud Kei Vav Kei of creation is Chesed. The nature of Chesed is to give. That's why it creates. The problem is, as we'll see as we go through this, you can't create by Chesed alone, because Chesed alone would not allow the created thing to exist, because the power of creation does not allow the created to exist because it's constantly overwhelming it. Like someone sometimes who tries to train a new person in their business to take a trainee, they're so busy training them and showing them that they're overwhelming them, doing everything for them. Stop doing everything, let me do it. No, but I'm showing you and I'm giving you, just let me do it. So it's like like sometimes you come in the kitchen to help somebody and it ends up you don't help them, they're just doing everything and showing you how you're supposed to be helping them. So you get overwhelmed by the chesed. Gevura is the restriction. We explain many examples about the idea of chesed is to give. Now the technical translation of the word chesed usually is attraction. That's what we say as the scientific name. Spherois is attraction and Gevura is rejection. But that's really just a very technical name. Chesed really means it's the idea of giving, the idea of sharing self and giving and giving and giving. Gevura is holding back. As you mentioned many times, you can't have one without the other. You could, but it's a fail. Giving on its own without restricting is a fail because, like the example I gave last time was about a mother. The kid asked for candy, yes. Asked again for candy, yes. Again, yes. The kid has a stomach ache, but how could I say no? You're not being nice, you're being weak. Real chesed, real kindness, it's like any spice. You mix in with something sweet, a little bit of the other flavors too, and together it brings out a perfect, complete flavor. Chesed, to be chesed, needs to have gevura. When you yell at your child not to run into the street, you're being kind to him. Even though it takes a certain strictness to yell at the child and he's going to cry, but you're doing it to protect him from running into the street and so on and so forth. So the idea, yes?
Chesed without gevura is enabling. What we call enabling.
Yes.
Today.
Chesed Gevura could be in the one area, could become enabling. It has many different flaws. Now, there is a tremendous quality to chesed, and that means to give. And the more chesed you have, the more you give. And the more you give of yourself, and the more you give in quantity, and the more you give to people who don't deserve it. It becomes, but when you give it, you have to consider the receiver, what they need. If someone asks you for a cup of water, and you give enough water to fill up a swimming pool, you're not doing them a favor. What do you mean? I gave you 600,000 gallons of water. Shkoyach. But that's not what I just needed, one cup. So it has to be done with a seichel. And that seichel, the balance, is called gevura. And gevura too. Strictness without the balance of chesed becomes not strictness, becomes cruelty, becomes oppressiveness, becomes abuse, becomes tyranny. In order for it to be a balance, it has to have chesed mixed in that it's successful. And there's a time for strictness. When a person does something that has to be punished in a court of law, you have to also consider, is this punishment going to be effective in helping the person in the long run, or is it just going to be a way of inflicting pain? It has to be a punishment that inflicts not just a punishment, At the same time, also has a process of helping and assisting the growth and the rebirth of this person, etc. So, but in this point here, we're talking about Chesed and Gevura. We're going to get to, obviously, at the end of this chapter and the next chapter, that the Shemesh Umagein, Hashem creates the world in the process of, at the same time, he's giving light. At the same time, he's restricting that light. And we're going to see the tremendous, amazing concept in here. Okay, so we're going to continue today from, so before we continue where we're up to, just to remind one more concept. And that is, we said this idea of Hashem's chesed is often called gedula. We find that the gedula is referred to chesed. As a matter of fact, some people don't call it chesed gevura tiferes. They say gedula gevura tiferes. They actually don't use the word chesed. They use the word gedula, because we find in many places that the word that we see in Tillim and other places, davening, that the gedula is interchangeable with chesed. Because truth to be told is, the bigger person you are, the kinder you are. A person who is small doesn't have the ability to give. They used to say, I don't know if this is true or not, they would say, when you have to go fundraising, don't go fundraising from a guy who owns a grocery store. They say, why not? They say, go to a guy who sells couches, go to a guy who sells jewelry. Because the guy who sells groceries is thinking profits in terms of pennies. He charges an extra 3 cents on a bar of chocolate and 4 cents on a package of gum. So when you ask him to give, he's thinking, 1 second, you want me to give a profit of 4,000 sales of chocolate? Where you go to a guy who sells couches, it's the profit of 1 couch. Okay, they think in bigger numbers. They don't think in pennies and nickels. It's a small. It's not a critique of the person who's a grocery person. He just thinks in small terms. A person who's big thinks in big terms. You can give big, and again, it's all relative to what the ask is and what it's about.
But everything is welcome.
Everything is welcome. Everything helps.
Okay.
Everything helps. Everything should be appreciated, because there's 2 separate things when it comes to tzedakah and helping people. There's the receiver, what the receiver benefits, and what the giver gives up of himself. A lot of times we don't appreciate that the person who gave a smaller amount of money gave up much more of themselves. We know a person who has $1 million and he gives $100 to charity, and a person who has $50 and he gives $5 to charity, which is a bigger struggle. A guy, what's going to change is one guy's missing lunch today, one guy's not. So at the same time, we can't be critical of that person. We have to realize the bottom line is he gave it, and the truth is, at the end of the day, the $100 will help much more than the $5. So there's a lot of levels to appreciate in the world of giving, but that's another story. Okay, so we find like this, a fascinating idea. I'm just going to go back a couple lines just to read inside, but I'm going to start where we're up to in a moment. We know where it says Hashem is, we're on page Ayin Tes. We know where it says Hashem is praised and davening. We have the words HaGadol, HaGibber, etc. But we find something fascinating I'll talk about in a few minutes. And what is that? When Daniel, when he wrote down the praise of Hashem, he left out the word Gibber. He just wrote HaGadol, and he skipped the word Gibber. We want to get back to the put it back in. So we spoke about this for a little bit last week. I want to focus on that today. And the truth is, the main focus today will be on the quality and the characteristic of Gibber, of Gevura over Chesed. A lot of times we see Chesed as the unbelievable quality, and Gevura as the necessary evil, so to speak. We have to sort of have some Gevura. Well, we're going to discover today that the truth is Gevura is as great and possibly greater in its expression of God's power than Chesed. And that's what we want to talk about. Just to give a little sneak preview is, again, we mentioned this last week briefly, and that is, why did Daniel take out the word Gibber? He said, I don't understand. Didn't God see the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash? Where was his power to stop it? How did he allow things to happen? Where was the strength of Hashem to stop and hold back the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash? How did he allow the Jewish people to be exiled? How was it possible? So he said, I can't put the word Gibber in. The Anchek and that's Hagdela, who were there, the ones actually included the Sefer Daniel, which has this statement into the 24 books of the Torah, 24 books of the written Torah. They changed it back to Hagadol, Hagibor. They put the word Gibber back in. Why? Didn't they know what Daniel wrote? Didn't they appreciate it and they put it in? Of course. But they were saying something else. Of course, you don't understand how God did not defend the Jewish people. But you understand that for him to hold back his might takes greater strength than to express his might. A lot of times, not saying something takes much more strength than saying something. You're sitting with somebody, and you're somebody that needs to hear some words of encouragement. Someone has to hear words of critique. When you want to say something, when you want to say it, the strength required to say the right thing is strong and powerful, and you need some strength and conviction to say the right thing. But it takes even greater strength not to say anything at all. Anyone who is has family who they disagree with knows what this means. Sometimes, or you're involved in a corporation or a board of the school, sometimes not saying something which is the right thing to do is much more difficult than saying something. As a matter of fact, we had it in Tanya, I think 2 days ago, 3 days ago, the idea of able to, in the middle of a good conversation, to say something which brings out somehow a flaw or mocking or putting someone else down. The Alter Rebbe says the ability, the strength of character to hold back that's real. Meaning, when you want to say something and you don't, that takes a lot of strength. It's, as a matter of fact, today I once heard from one of our mashpiyim, one of our teachers in yeshiva, that a lot of times in Tanya we discuss the importance of containing yourself, not to give into temptation of eating too much delicious fried chicken or cake or cheesecake or delicious. Slow down, don't be so indulgent. Have some what we call a skafia. So I heard from one of the teachers. He said these days we don't ask you to hold back on the chicken and the coffee and the chocolate cake. We ask you to hold back on what you're speaking. The skafia is don't say something you shouldn't, or don't say something because it's enjoyable and you get everyone to laugh, and maybe for someone else it's not enjoyable. The self-control, what to say, is a big deal. But here we're talking about something even more, as we're going to see, the trick, the impressiveness, the greatness of Hashem's Gevura is absolutely more impressive and great than Hashem's Gedula, Hashem's Chesed. The attribute of contraction, restriction, holding back, is much more powerful than the attribute of giving, of expressing. So first we're going to explain about Chesed, how strong it is, how powerful it is, and how amazing it is. And we're going to say how Gevura is the same or even more. That's what we're up to here. So we're halfway down. The first word on the line is Vehine Kamoisha Midazu. Okay. The first word on the line is Vehine. Page Ayantes.
I agree, but we were here, that Rabbi Market.
I know, but then I jumped.
Exactly.
Oh, is that where I stopped last week?
Yeah.
Then I'll continue from there.
Thank you.
You know what? You see, I can't remember always what I did, because when I prepare, I'm learning it. I don't remember which I actually shared. Okay.
But we mark you.
Thank you. And that's why we'll stay on course. I will refrain from saying the wrong thing. All right. So we'll back up. The first word on the line is Kaf Mem Shin, which is Kamesha Kasav La'el, like we said before. Okay. Then we have a dot, and we start. Vehine, Besidu Shvachar Shalakadosh Baruch Hu, in the order of praises of God's greatness. Ksiv Hagadol Hagibur Chulu, the great one and the strong one, and we know Pirish Hagadol. What does Hagadol mean? Who midas Chesed v'Ispashtos Achayis. It's the midah, it's the attribute of kindness, which is spreading and sharing God's life. Going higher to the highest and lower to lower, meaning at all ends of the spectrum, we are at the attribute of Chesed is the name Havaya, is giving and expressing and sharing and giving life. And it happens in a couple pieces here, but I'm going to go and explain this. It first makes them to exist from nothing to something. So the first thing we do is, let's take for an example the tree or planet Earth. First Hashem makes it exist. That's the ayin liyesh, and then he makes it continuing to exist every single second. And then also what Hashem does is he gives the life force to do what it does. Whether it's a tree to grow, whether it's a bird to fly and breathe, and it's oxygen to flow, and it's blood to pump, etc. The life force that keeps it alive, that soul that keeps all the electrical pulse in the heartbeat, that keeps it going, the p-pulse, as we say, that start going, that is the constant life that Hashem gives and the constant existence. The vikayomim bechesed chinam, and this is Hashem's ultimate kindness. The greatest type of kindness, see, unusual in life, when someone does something for someone else, there is some sort of, I don't want to say kickback, because it's not always a kickback, but there's a benefit. There's something I get. Sometimes I feel good. I give someone a gift. I just feel good. I went to sleep that night with a good heart because I gave someone supper who was hungry. Or I went to sleep well because I helped someone's car broke down. Or I supported the shul. Or I helped a family in Israel. Or I sent money to Russia. I did something, or to Ukraine. I sent money. I did something to help out someone in need. Or I do things. I'm nice to you. I send you shalach manos. You send me shalach manos. I support the shul. Other people support the shul. I help out here. They help. Meaning, usually kindness has some return. When Hashem does a kindness, there's no return. There's nothing that we can do back for him. There's nothing that we can do in turn for because we can't. Im tzedakta matitnli. If you're righteous, what are you giving to Hashem? There's nothing you could do to give Hashem anything. So Hashem gives us life, and Hashem gives the mosquitoes and the birds and the fish and all the animals and the world and the all life. It's an actual pure act of kindness. And it's called Gedula. Why is it called not Chesed but Gedula? Because it comes from Hashem's greatness. Hashem's greatness is that He gives. You know, some people, it's amazing. You see this in life. It's a sad or fascinating truth. Some people are not comfortable helping out what they call losers, schleppers. They like to help out someone who's nice. I invite them to my house, but the guy who's this, not. I mean, some people, of course, don't act that way. But the nature is when someone has a bit of an ego or a bit of an insecurity, which is really same as ego, what happens is we are afraid to help out the people who are smaller, associate with them. I don't want to be seen as like, it's an interesting thing. You know, you have a fifth grader is embarrassed to hang out with the first graders. But someone who is a parent or a bubby or someone in college doesn't feel bad to hang with the first graders. Why? It doesn't challenge my greatness to hang out with little kids. The bigger you are, the less you're challenged when you engage with the small people. Only a small person is challenged when it has to recognize, you know, young kids. And what happens in the world of bullies and the world of not accepting friends? I don't want that kid. He makes me feel small. He joins our group. It's my group, whatever it is. There's a certain insecurity that someone else you're afraid will take away from your identity. The bigger you are, the less you feel that way. The bigger you are, the more not only you'll feel that way, you'll help them, you'll give. You'll give to people who don't seem to deserve it. Why are you giving to them? Sometimes you say, why are you giving to that guy? I understand he deserves it. That organization deserves your money. That organization, they don't deserve your money. I'm bigger than the pettiness if they deserve or not. I help everybody. Giving and sharing, whether it's time, whether it's finances, whether it's life, is the greater you are, the more you're able to give and put aside all pettiness. Someone who's affected by pettiness is a small person. So he says the reason why Hashem can give to every creature, that comes from His greatness. That's what the Chesed is. The Chesed is God's greatness that He can give to every single creature in the world. There's no end. There's no way to come to the end to appreciate, to say, I finally got to understand God's greatness. No, you won't. No matter how much you think you understand God's depth of His kindness, it goes further.
It's a little different.
What?
Because God created us. It's not like He's our friend. It's like if you have a child who is needy, so you will be taking care of him more than a child who is independent. So, and Hashem created us the way we are. Hashem, of course, going to be taking care of us.
Right. Okay. Very, very good point. But the idea that's explained other ways. So that's why Hashem cares for the Yidden, or cares for His creatures, cares for every creature in the world. But we're focusing on another point, understanding how insignificant all of creation is to God. You're talking about how God, at the end, makes all of us significant in His eyes. Why are we significant? Because that's how He made it. He wants us to be significant. He desired that. But before Hashem desires that, we're significant. We're insignificant in the highest level, in the most profound way. We have no significance. And we'll go through some metaphors in a second. But your point is right after we know the truth of how Hashem perceives us. But at this stage of Tanya, we're talking about the reality that how insignificant the created world is before God. Why should you have an interest? Why does it matter to God? The same way you wouldn't concern yourself if you have in your house, in the backyard, a giant thing of ants climbing on the grass. You wouldn't worry if the ants think you're smart or not. I don't even worry. I don't have interest in what they're thinking. The closeness to you and the ants is very close. The closeness to us and God is much, much more distant. So why should Hashem care how we feel? Obviously, if someone took an interest and created, and they say, like, you made those ants and you started a farm with 2 ants and you built it up and you created it and you won it, suddenly you gave those ants a value that mattered to you, especially if you trained them to do certain things. But here again, we're talking about the idea in itself. The creation in itself is insignificant before God. So why does He provide for it? Just because He's a nice God. He's the essence of, and we'll see what that means in just a moment. Therefore Hashem feeds or supplies and provides for Hashem not only creates from nothing to something, which is the first amazing thing He does, He also has an unlimited amount of stuff He created. You cannot finish counting all the created creatures and species in this world. Because the nature of good is to do good. God by nature is kind. The kindness does not stop. It's an endless flowing, and there's an endless amount of creatures and created beings and beauties in the world. You could travel and nonstop your entire life and see every type and more types of beautiful mountains and hills and sunsets and sunrises and forests and winds, and it's endless. The beauty of Hashem's world. This is just what we're looking here in the tiny little earth that we see. Which doesn't even exist as a microscopic dot in the big scheme of the universe. It's nothing. The universe is I don't know, 60 billion light years wide. I don't know what they say it is. The existence of Earth as a thing is not even a grain of grass, not even a grain of sand in the scheme of the world. It's nothing. So just like this quality of Hashem's kindness is something only Hashem has, and we're talking about Hashem has really is on a couple layers. It's the layer of, first of all, that in numbers, Hashem's in numbers, He creates in infinite amount of creation. In quality, the quality and the nature and the character is also infinite. And also the fact not only He creates them, but He gives them continuous life. Hashem is continuously giving life to these creations. He didn't just create them. Hashem created billions and trillions of, the human body is made up of a couple trillion cells, 60, 70 trillion cells. And we just think about the amount of detail that God puts in, and not only put it into there, and He's giving it life, and He's giving it function, giving existence down to the atomic level, and not just that, but Hashem is doing it for billions of people, and trillions of insects and ants and animals, and all of this. Why do you have to have those zebras running around? Because Hashem is kind, and He loves to, and I shouldn't say He loves. He by definition is a giver and a supplier and a provider. Now, He's going to say something phenomenal here. He's going to say something which is really an interesting idea. Not only is the idea of creating from nothing to something, yesh ma'ayin, something that we can't do, our mind can't even grasp it. And he's going to explain it in a very fascinating way. Our mind cannot grasp this idea that Hashem creates from nothing to something. And then basically, once we say that, we'll say we can't grasp what means Hashem's kindness. Because as we'll see, one relates to the other just right now. What does that mean? The gam midah zu, this midah for Hashem to create from something, from nothing to something, is something that the human mind can't grasp. We think we can grasp it, we can understand it, but we can't do it. We can't even understand it. We start thinking for a moment, what does it mean to create from nothing to something? If you just say the words, you create from nothing, here's nothing and here's something. Let's see what nothing is. Let's see what something is. How does it make that quantum leap? How does it jump from nothing to something? There's different levels that a person can't understand. Sometimes you can't understand something because you've never seen it before. Take, for example, God forbid, someone who's blind, or somebody who never in his life walked out of a dark cave. Let's use that example. He lived his entire life in a cave. And you tell the person, I want to explain to you the difference between blue and red. You can't explain it to them. Why? Not because they're not smart enough. It's because it's not something they ever saw in their life. They can't understand something they've never seen. So the first thing is we're talking about things that are spirituality concepts.
They don't have the perception.
We don't have these tools even we don't have a knowledge of this field. Someone who's never seen colors, you can't explain to them. So blue is more of like and red already, there's no words we can use because they never saw colors. Somebody who saw colors and can't see it now, you can explain to them. That's the first level. The second level is sometimes you have information that is just above my level of understanding. For an example, I'm right now in 3rd, 4th, or 5th grade math or science, and you want to talk to me about quantum physics. It's there, but it's not something that I'm able to reach. It's above my ability, but it's not above my ability that I can never get there. It's above my ability that right now I can't understand it. If I would go now for 10 years to college and I would have good teachers, I guess I understand that too. But right now it's way above my ability.
But sometimes the teacher can
Go down and here.
exactly. So you can understand, for example, one thing would be nice about the colors. Let's say you get a blind person or a person in a cave. You can maybe tell them, well, the blue is kind of a calm sensation, and because you want to use another sense to let them understand where are you going. Or red, it's hot and exactly.
So what you're saying is very
Passion.
interesting, because that is how we study Hasidus. We talk about Hashem's kindness. You think Hashem's kindness really is like our kindness. You think Hashem's strength. So of course, that's exactly what we do. What you said now is exactly what we do with learning Hasidus. We try and give metaphors and say Hashem gives, He takes, His voice. Hashem spoke. You think it was like, hello, how are you? Hashem doesn't speak. So what does it mean? It's an expression of self. So you're 100% correct. Now, if somebody would say, so I saw a blue color and it was hot. How is that possible? When I said blue is colder and I didn't mean that it feels warm. I mean, It's a go explain it to somebody. Again, we're talking only in the difficult. Then you have things that are above our mind. Then you have even more that it's not possible for our mind to ever grasp it. And the example we discussed again once on a Shabbos afternoon here at great length, we had debated about it, we discussed it, is the idea, could a person understand the ability of taking an elephant and putting it through the eye of a needle? Not that the elephant became smaller or the eye of the needle became bigger, they remained each size and it went through no problem. Even in a dream, you can't dream, you can't imagine, you can imagine a rock flying. You can imagine, because it's the same rock, but now it's on the floor, it's on the air. Something which doesn't fit, but for God to do that, is nothing. For something to be created from nothing to something is all three of those together. We're talking about something out of our ability of knowledge. We're talking about a world that we don't understand spirituality properly. We just say warm and soft and nice colors. It's above our ability to understand it because it's a much more profound idea intellectually. And finally, it's the world of knowledge we can't tap into. I can't picture an elephant going through the eye of a needle without either of them changing sizes. Hashem does it every morning whenever he wants. He can do it all day long. But why? Because it's something that we live in the world where space is space and time is time and all these things matter. Where in truth, Hashem is not limited by that. And therefore, when we think of something which is nothing, how does that come into existence? Because if you truly understand that it's nothing, it can't come into existence. The fact that Hashem makes it come to existence is an impossibility. And then it exists as an identity doesn't make sense either. So this whole idea is above our ability. So not just, he says, Hashem's kindness and Hashem's creation, something which we can't do. It says, we'll see in a second, he says, we can't even give life to a dead mosquito. You can't even take a dead mosquito and say, you know what? We figured out how to give it life. We have all the scientists in the world get together, massive event in Sweden, or I don't know where in Switzerland, all the greatest minds. We're going to give this bug the ability to fly. We figure you can't. You can't give life to a bug. You forget about creating the bug from scratch and creating it. The level of creation and life force that Hashem has and gives is out of our ability to function. Oh, so now let's go back here and see it. It's above all the seichel of any created being, and our understanding. There is no way for a human being to understand, or any created being for that matter, even an angel. When we say created being, we don't just mean humans, we mean angels too. It's impossible. Why is it impossible to understand? And he explains why. It is above the seichel of the and the way he's going to explain why is fascinating. We're going to go now, and this seems like to be off the topic, but he's making a very important point. And I'll just tell you outside the point first, and then we'll do it inside. He's going to say, a lot of times we think that there's something called Hashem, and Hashem has certain emotives. He's kind, he's strict. When we say Havaya, that Hashem is called the kind God, Elokim, he's the judging God, Kael, he's a warrior God, whatever the different words that we use, or the merciful God, we use different descriptions of God to describe him. It's not that Hashem has a behavior. Hashem and his behavior are one, which means there's two ways when you have something that comes, we say a oneness, a one, there's two ways to say a oneness. One is called Achdus HaMorkav, and one's called Achdus HaPashut. Achdus HaMorkav means a composite, a pen. A pen is a composite of a plastic, a liquid ink, a pointy thing, a tube. All these things, when you're done, you got a pen. What is it really? It's a composite of 5, 6, 7, 8 different ingredients and chemicals. The human body is a composite of 248 limbs, 365 veins and sinews. It's a composite of all different emotive and electrical pulse, plumbing. It's a complex human being. It's one. That's all us. Achdus HaPashut, that's all Achdus HaMorkav. It's one. There's one guy here, but he's made up of many, many things. A painting. A painting is made up of many, many colors coming together as one, but it's one painting. That's a scholars coming together. Achdus HaPashut means it's only one. And as much as you break it down, it's only one. So when you say Hashem is kind, you can't say Hashem is being kind. Hashem, kindness, one, Achdus HaPashut. There's no separation, which means just like Hashem's essence is something which we can't understand, we can't relate to, it's above our ability to even comprehend what God is. The same thing, God's kindness is one with God, is the same. Mahu, it's like Hu Shmo Echad, him and his name are one. Just like Hashem is not something a human mind can grasp or a creative mind can grasp, no one can grasp Hashem's kindness because Hashem's kindness is not separate from Him. That's His essence. It's achdus habashot. It's a oneness, and therefore Hashem's kindness can't be understood. So now I was explaining to you the why we can't understand it. Till now I was telling you how great it is. It's above this. It's smarter. It's greater. It's out of our. Then he says it's not even in the world of understanding because we can't understand God. Therefore, we can't understand His kindness. Why? Because God and His kindness are achdus habashot.
Only kindness.
Oh, excellent point. This is where it gets complicated in the Chassidus. Also, with Hashem and His Gevura is one. Problem with saying that when you say Hashem was second, when He's kind and when He's Gevura, which one's that one of Him? All of them are there, and it depends on what level you're talking of godliness, the level of Atzilus, the above Atzilus, etc. But you're right. Hashem, when He's being strict, Him and His strictness is one. When He's being kind, Him and His kindness are one. When He's being merciful, Him and His mercy is one. Whenever He's being, that's what it says. Hashem is called by His character. Hashem is identity as His character. So because His character, Him are one. We could be kind. I could be happy. I could be angry. I could be giving. I could be stingy. All depending on my mood right now. Those are all because I, in my true identity, could be all those things. I'm neither. I'm a person that has free choice. Hashem's essence is one with His expression, which is an idea, again, that's above me to explain. I'm sure you have some great masters explain it. But this idea tells us that therefore it's impossible to understand God's kindness because God's kindness is as elusive as God's essence because they're both one. And I'll say it inside here. Why? Why is it that we can't understand God that is above our seichel? Because this kindness and this creating something from nothing all comes from Hashem's name Havaya, which is the midah of Chesed. It's all midas gedulos shel Kadosh Baruch Hu. It's the midah of Chesed of Hashem. VaKadosh Baruch Hu midaisav achdus pashut. Hashem and His character is one, not achdus hamorkav chas v'shalom. Achdus hapashut, a oneness of absolute oneness, not a composite. Like it says in the Zohar HaKadosh, the ihu v'garmihu muichat. Hashem, usually Gamuri means a body or vessels, but in Chassidus we mean midais. Hashem and His midais are one. Whenever you say ihu v'gamir echad, you say Hashem and His midais are one. You can't say Hashem is being kind. It's Hashem's kindness. Hashem is kind. And therefore he says, just like it's impossible for any person created or anything created to understand his creator, the same way, it's impossible for the human mind or the created mind to understand Hashem's chesed. Now is when we go into the fascinating point. And that is as follows. And this is the point you want to get to with this whole discussion here. And what is that? Now we just explained how Hashem's kindness, Hashem's chesed, Hashem's gedula is above our understanding. It's the one with Hashem, etc. This is the Havaya part. We said Hashem is Shemagan Havaya Elikim, like a son and the shield of a son, Hashem Elikim. Now, when we go to the next step, we'll start appreciating the answer to the question we asked in the end of chapter 3. Now he says it's not just Hashem's chesed, Hashem's kindness, Hashem Havaya. That's incredible. You know what's even more cool? Hashem's Gevura, Hashem's concealment. And at first glance, it's like, why is that a big deal? I understand why kindness is incredible. What's incredible about concealment? We're going to see Hashem's concealment is not concealment like we think of concealment. We think of concealment in a certain way, and we'll get to that. Hashem's concealment is a whole different type of concealment, and that's an incredible concept that our mind, again, can't grasp. Let's go another few lines. And just like it's impossible for any created being to understand Hashem's chesed, Hashem's kindness, which that means Hashem's ability to create something from nothing and give it life, the two stages, making it exist and giving it life to continue to exist as a living being. Like it says, Hashem's chesed builds worlds. Same exact. The same way it's impossible to understand Hashem's Gevura, Hashem's Tzimtzum. In the process of creation, we have two things going on constantly. The idea of Havaya and the idea of Elikim. Havaya is Chesed, Elikim is Gevura. Havaya is creating and revelation, and Chesed and Gevura, or Elikim, is restriction, holding back. Just like it's impossible to understand the Chesed aspect, the Havaya aspect, it's as difficult mamish as kach mamish. It's impossible to understand Hashem's Gevura aspect Hashem's restriction, Hashem's concealment aspect. Shehi midas hatzimtzum. What is this midah of Gevura? That's contraction, umenias espashtos, and holding back of expression. That's an important word to remember. You look at the word to use, menias espashtos, holding back of expression. Hachayis, the life, midulosai, from his greatness, milated ulas galis al nevroim, to go and be revealed upon the created beings. Lachiyesam, to give them life, ulakaimam begili, to give them life and to make them exist in a revealed state. Meaning Hashem does the second biggest trick. The first biggest trick, we should say both biggest tricks. The first biggest trick is that Hashem creates from something to nothing, and Hashem creates in His chesed a world, and He gives life to mosquitoes and the universe, which is mind-boggling in its endlessness, both in the physical world and the spiritual worlds. Then the first biggest trick is that Hashem conceals all that, and when you look at the cup, you don't see godliness, you just see a cup. That is as big as a trick as creating it. And as we'll see why as we go through this, it is an unbelievable concept, but we're going to stop here. I see it's 10:50 already. We'll stop here. The next class, we'll start from the top of this page, understanding why is concealment and why is it necessary and why is it and how does it, what's the incredible aspect about it. And with this, we'll come to understand how we are able to exist as independent beings, because Hashem is doing two things at once. At the same time, while He's creating us with this endless light, that nothing else, like the light of the sun is found in the sun, that nothing can exist there, everything loses identity, at the same exact time is concealing Himself from being seen, and the created beings don't see Him. He's hidden completely, and these two things together allow us to have the two impossibilities, the impossibility to exist, and the impossibility to exist, that we sense our existence, and we don't get lost in Hashem's light and glory, and we don't lose our identity.